Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our monthly meetup. Always happy to have you all here on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you might be joining in. I'm just going to do a quick introduction to FEDSA if you're not sure what that is, thank our sponsors, and then do a quick share some where you can get hold of us. And then we'll move on to our talk for this evening. So FEDSA is Front-End Engineering and Design South Africa. Started as Cape Town front-end developers. These all 15 years ago, I think.
Everybody asked at DevConf, and I couldn't say. I just said it's over 10 years, but it could be 15.
It's closer to 15. Yeah, and then Liesel started ZAPD or ZAPD, which was South African Product Designers, and we've amalgamated now into FEDSA, which is Front-End Engineering and Design South Africa. And our mission is to, grow and create community links within front end and product design within in South Africa. Okay, of course, we have some sponsors that we need to thank. Without them, we can't bring you all these nice things. So KRS joined us as a sponsor fairly recently, last year, and they sponsor our bi-weekly newsletter, which we send out, containing interesting links to things that are happening in the front-end and design world, some links to jobs, recaps of some talks we might think people might find interesting, and so on. That goes out, as I say, bi-weekly, and we'll share the link to sign up for that. And then we've had two long-term sponsors, NML and IO, Liesel and I both have associations with over many years. And they've been sponsoring us for a very, very long time. So thanks very much to our sponsors who allow us to bring these talks to you. Okay, a couple of things. So our speaker tonight is Rudi. You can follow him on LinkedIn. I've put his LinkedIn there. We'll share that as well in the chat. So you please leave all your comments and questions in the chat, either on YouTube or LinkedIn. They do come to us in the studio, and we will go through all of them at the end of the talk. Then join our newsletter. As I said, we'll share the link to that. And if anyone would like to volunteer to do a talk, you're welcome to get in touch with any of us. That's Liesel and I who are on this one. Skulk, who I'm sure people know, or Yusha, we've spelled his name incorrectly. I will need to fix that. Good thing he's not here. We also have a Discord, LinkedIn, Meetup. We'll share all those. We'll share all those links for you. Okay, so yeah, comments and questions in the chat, and we will get onto them. Right. So our talk tonight is from Rudi van Wyk, and it is titled "The Art of Project Thinking: Turning Effort into Results." And without any more waffling from me, I'm going to hand over to Rudi and to take it away. There we go.
Justin, just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me clearly, and then I'll jump in. Perfect.
All good.
Cool. First of all, FEDSA, thank you for allowing me this opportunity, and for everyone joining, thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with me. So I'll share some information about me and my company towards the end, but I think a little bit of context that's worth sharing right now is that I'm a project management professional. And so I own a company that essentially helps other businesses get more value out of their projects and out of their project teams. And something we are seeing more and more are non-project teams are getting more interested in applying project management principles. And that's really what got us started with this sort of talk, where we focus on what does it mean to think in terms of projects. And so this evening, if you can leave here with just another thinking gear, I would consider it a success. So I'm going to go through the slideshow, but I'll jump in between the slideshow and a Notion page that I've created for this evening, where we're going to also apply whatever we talk about, we'll apply it to an actual project as we go through it. So to set the scene, a second. Okay. So I think to set the scene, just think about a time where you really were part of the perfect setup, right? The best talent the world has, the smartest people, everyone put in real effort, everyone had great intentions. And yet, even though you had that perfect setup, sometimes that doesn't result in the perfect outcome, right? Initiatives stall, some activities end up nowhere, and sometimes work get done, but then somewhere along the line, the goalposts have moved. You end up with more questions than answers, and the value you were supposed to deliver never quite arrived. So there's probably an argument for, yeah, but you did not have the right people, capacity was an issue, effort was an issue. I would argue it was probably a thinking problem. And I want to just disclaim this, that this is not going to be a very philosophical talk about how humans think. This is going to be a practical application of project management principles that you can apply in your everyday work. Think about it as projectize everything you do. And one of the reasons why we have grown so passionately about focusing on project thinking is in a time where technology changes on an hourly basis. Like what worked yesterday is obsolete tomorrow. I think an effective and high quality way of thinking is what's going to be standing amongst all the change. So, with that said, these are the 5 project thinking principles I'm going to run through today. So, we're going to start with think before you do anything. Then we're going to go into think ahead, think back, think ownership. And then for the first 4 principles, I'm going to tell you to think a lot. And then I'm going to tell you to not think too much. Okay, so just bear with me. Cool. So let's start with the first one. So think about the last time you were halfway through a piece of work or something that you did, and then suddenly you just started feeling a little bit uncertain, and not about how to do what you're supposed to do, but about why are you doing this? What is this supposed to achieve? Is this part of a bigger initiative? Is this part of a bigger problem that's being solved? And what requirements am I actually meeting by this piece of work that I'm doing? And in some cases, perhaps more worryingly, is that those around you can also not answer those questions. And I think you would agree that this sort of scenario is not what you want halfway through an initiative or a project. It's something that needs to be resolved before you start. And so this first project thinking principle is about exactly that. It's about standing still and just think a bit before you jump in and get going. And so the first idea I want to introduce you is VAT. So not the type of VAT we don't like. This is a VAT we very much like. And the idea here is to really think of yourself as a value add. So with everything we do, we want to add value. So if you're part of a big project or a small piece of a bigger puzzle, this concept is about thinking that your goal is to add value. But now the significance of the value we add really depends on what is the value that is being expected. So in other words, you can have the best people in your team, you could work 7 weeks overtime, you can land a product in a month's time where it was supposed to take 3 months. If what you deliver at the end of the day doesn't match what was expected, you can have added very little value. In fact, you can end up with a zero-sum game in terms of value added. So what I want to get across here is by focusing before you start a project, by focusing on that first bit, the why are you doing what you're doing, and understanding where it fits into the bigger picture is a crucial step very few people often take. And I want to take it one level further, is just to clarify the picture even more, is if you can understand where what you are busy with fits in. Usually big projects can easily be tied back to a broader strategy or a bigger problem that to be solved. But all in all, upfront, get a clear picture of why are you doing what you're doing and where does this fit in. And so the first project management insight I want to leave you with, and this is borrowed from Prince 2, which is a project management methodology, is this concept of continuous justification. At any stage of a project, you must be able to explain why are you doing what you're doing. And maybe that often means 3 weeks in, you drop everything because it no longer makes sense. But then that's better than seeing it through and then it doesn't make sense. So keep asking yourself, what value does this add that I'm doing? The second point I want to make within this principle of let's just think first before we act is clarity in isolation doesn't mean much. So if you're clear on what's expected, it doesn't mean much until everyone has the same picture. Everyone is seeing the same picture. And I think what a lot of people get right is they can get a picture clear on what the requirements are. But what I want to focus on is very few people have clarity and alignment early on about what happens if there are changes. How do we manage changes along the way? And I want to make it clear here that a change control process, yes, it's borrowed from waterfall and it's made for big capital projects, but it's applicable anywhere and it's not supposed to be heavy. It's not supposed to make change the enemy, but it allows you to take control of changes and minimize what we call silent absorption and drift. Okay, as I said, I'm going to try and make this practical. So I'm going to quickly open a Notion board here. And throughout this talk, we'll come back here, right? So in Notion, I've created a page and just help me imagine this into reality. Let's assume we've been given a task of digitizing and automating employee onboarding. All right, this is the task we've been given. Now, I want to ask you, where to from now? Where would you go next? And so the principle I'm trying to get across is before we go anywhere, let's understand why exactly are we doing this digitization and automation of employee onboarding and where this is fitting. And so you get the answers to that by asking what value is expected. And I want to just highlight this to show you that what you need to focus on as you start isn't a long list of deliverables. It is what are the benefits that we want to achieve by the end of this project. And then you might not have all the context you need by just focusing on your task, which is digitization and automation. But by understanding that your task fits into a broader growth readiness strategic objective, that's a big term. But I want to get across that, like, understand the bigger picture and where what you do fit in. Then on to obtaining that clarity up front. Again, this is a very basic tool that one can use. It's a table explaining all the requirements, where they come from, what are the deliverables linked to those requirements. And ultimately, before you start, you need alignment on certain deliverables need to match a certain criteria at the end to be accepted. So that needs to be clear upfront before you really start any of the work. One thing I did not mention is by the end of this talk, I will share this project page in Notion, an example of one that you can take home and use in your everyday line of work. And then the one thing I wanted to highlight as well is this change control plan. So again, it might sound heavy, but this has been a game changer. And to apply it outside of projects, I have a clause like this in a contract I sign with the client, just to make sure that everyone is upfront aligned on if changes were to arise, how do we manage it? And it's really answering basic questions. So first of all, what constitutes a change as part of this specific project? So for example, adding forms after the agreed list has been finalized, or extending go live date. Those are examples of changes that will probably come And so we need to develop a little process of how do we manage those changes. And then a basic process to say, okay, whoever reports it, do a quick analysis. We hand it over to who needs to approve it. And it can be as simple as that. What's clear though is you have to explain who are the role players and who will approve which change types. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of this again. You'll leave with a template like this. Coming to Notion is just me trying to put what I'm explaining into a practical use case. Okay, so we'll come back here. Let's go back to the slides, and we'll go to the next principle, which is about thinking ahead. So we've talked about thinking before we act, and now this is about thinking ahead. So I'm sure many of you have been in scenarios where, like, just all of a sudden you're caught off guard by something unexpected, like a vendor did not deliver, someone in your team who plays a crucial role just left at the worst moment, dependencies just wasn't in place when you needed them, and just something no one expected just suddenly happened. And now I want you to just think about that and ask whether all of those things were truly unexpected, or were some of them just unexamined. So not all surprises are surprises. Some of them are risks that were just never looked at. And so in project management, most of you would know there's this concept called risk management, or simply put, it's really a list of worries with a plan attached. And practically, I'll show you now what this is. But essentially, it's asking three questions. You ask, what can possibly go wrong? And then follow-up questions around, what can I do to prevent it? And what will my response be? And the project management insights I want you to take away here is that this shouldn't be done in isolation. So early on in a project, get people around the table, different stakeholders, and brainstorm what can go wrong in this project or activity that we're busy with. Similar to risks are assumptions, and assumptions are a bit of a dark horse. So a big part of thinking ahead is really capturing the assumptions that you make. So in every piece of work we do, we make assumptions. Some of them very subtle, some of them more obvious. For example, suppliers will always be on time, the budget won't change, key people will always be available. Those are all assumptions that we make along the way, but rarely do we analyze them and test them. And maybe that's because typically you can just wing it and it works out. But every now and then an assumption is proven to be false, and then the whole plan unravels. So risks and assumptions are where surprises come, and there are ways to minimize surprises. So I'll take you back to Notion, and just remember the project we're doing is digitizing and automating employee onboarding. So we've gone through, let's just first understand why we're doing what we're doing. What's the bigger picture here? We have now aligned all stakeholders on what the requirements are, how we're going to manage change, and now we've started thinking ahead. So the way you manage risks in a project or whatever you do on a daily basis, I have a personal risk register for daily activities, just as an example of where you can apply this outside of the project world. So I've touched on this. Essentially, a risk register is about asking what can go wrong. And then depending on the answer that you ask, so what can I do to prevent that? So essentially the mitigation. And then if it ends up happening, what will our response be? You can go a step further if you want to prioritize and rank risks. You can quantify it by just evaluating the probability and the consequence. For those of you who don't know, risk really is probability times consequence. And that allows you to prioritize a risk, which is helpful when you have a long list of risks. I'll zoom in on ownership a little bit later, but again, every activity risk assumption needs an owner to take accountability for it. Okay, so a risk register like this is probably the thing I've seen move the needle most when implemented. Then assumptions, so slightly more basic, but really it's about listing the assumptions you make as you go and analyze what could go wrong if the assumption you make is proven to be false. And then you need to test it. And again, we need owners for assumptions. I did not talk about this, but I thought I'd just include it in here. So risks that materialize become issues. And again, you need to track issues to make sure someone is looking at them and they are being resolved. And you, as a project manager or any team member, need to have visibility on what are the issues currently in play. Again, something in general, team activities can also be applied. Okay. The big thing about risks and assumptions are that it's not a once-off activity. You need to monitor risks and assumptions continuously in a group with important stakeholders that can give input. Okay, so we've looked at thinking first, thinking forward, and now thinking back. So every team makes mistakes, every initiative hits problems. And the issue is not that we encounter problems when we do work or initiatives. The issue is how we act when we do. So most of us would just fix the problem and go on, like patch the symptom, absorb the delay, and get back to work. And then 6 months later, maybe it's a new team, a new project, but the same problem occurs. And the reason for that is that no one, when it happens the first time, no one took the time to just try and figure out why did it happen? Why is this problem occurring? And so this principle is really built on that pause where you just stand still and just think about why is this happening and how do we prevent it from happening again. Don't know who's seen this, but there's a principle in project management that says that a lesson isn't learned until someone does something differently because of it. And so the idea here is that when you encounter a problem, you need to try and fix it, but the fix must be aimed at the root cause. And so one way of getting to a root cause is by what we call 5 whys. A lot of teams stop after the first why. So you've encountered a problem. Let's say a supplier was late. You ask them why. They tell you it took more time than they thought. Okay, and then you go on. But what works well is to ask why 3 more times to get deeper factors. So let's use that example. So you ask them why did it take more time, and they would tell you, but we got the data late. Again, that's an easy point to just walk away. But if you ask again, they can come back and say, but they never had access to the system. And if you ask a last why, it can be that they were never given access because they never signed an NDA. An example of sometimes the root cause is so far from what you thought the problem was, which shows the relevancy of going through an exercise like this. Quick bit of insight. Siemens built a knowledge hub for 400,000 employees across 200 countries, and they saw a 25% productivity increase. And what a knowledge hub is institutional knowledge that you build up from lessons that you've learned. So nobody wants to go through the same problem more than once, personally, but also as a company. So what works really well is as you go on, as you learn what risks apply to your business, what assumptions you typically make, what lessons you've learned, to build that knowledge hub of mistakes made, how did you solve it, what did you implement. That's really a key part. And in Notion on this principle, I just want to show you what that can look like. So thinking back, so this is an example of what a knowledge hub can look like. It's a data table where you list what happened, what were the root cause, what did you learn from it, and what changes did you implement. This is not something that you build overnight, but again, this is a rhythm that you as a team get into to start capturing lessons that you've learned and to build up this knowledge hub. I mean, I'm sure you can imagine, like in the world of AI that we're living, what a rich data layer this will make for any agent sitting on top of it. Okay, then we'll move over to probably, don't know if I should say my favorite principle, but the one where I see the biggest issues. So I'm sure you've been involved where a project, initiative, or something lands within the team, whether it's an improvement or a new initiative or something on top of something else, but then no one really owns it. Some people pick some of it up, others wait to be told, but eventually a lot just start falling through the cracks. And I don't think that's because anyone's lazy. I think it's because no one ever took ownership of it. No one ever tracked it. And I'm a firm believer of everything needs an owner. Having an owner of a project or an activity really changes everything. And it's not just having a name attached to something, it's about having someone that's genuinely accountable, someone that understands the whole picture of what's going on, someone that at all times know what's been done, what's left, and what the risks are. And if you have ownership, it brings structure, discipline, and guidance to work that would typically drift, right? Again, PMI, the Project Management Institute, did research on this, and they found that you're 28% more likely to deliver on time and within budget if your project has a dedicated owner. And so, unfortunately, this is something that's a big gap. And how people sometimes fill this gap is by making even a bigger mistake, in my opinion. And that is when a team now needs an owner or a lead, they sometimes give it to the most capable person, right? It may be the lead developer, senior engineer, someone that's typically already stretched and has an operational or technical role, now gets to be the project manager as well. And the reason why I think this is an issue, well, I'm going to bring up a management principle attributed to Peter Drucker, and he said, what gets measured gets managed. And the reason why this applies here is when someone with an operational role gets the PM function, they get measured on how they do operationally. And then when the going gets tough and they don't have a lot of time, the PM function is going to disappear in the background. They're not measured by that. And so what doesn't get measured gets deprioritized. And it's not like they don't care, it's just like the incentives only point one way. So the takeaway here is that projects or any activity, even single actions within your team or project, needs dedication. And managing a project should be someone's priority. If it's not, it's going to fall to the background and project's going to not go well. Okay, back to our project and think ownership. One tool I want to just put here is really a RACI matrix. So let's say your team has 5 activities on the go, or the project consists of X amount of activities. What this tool allows you to do is to mark who is accountable, responsible, who needs to be consulted, and who just needs to be informed. This is a great tool to also make sure communication happens as it should. And the key here is that only one person can be accountable. And so having a tool like this implemented in whatever project you do or day-to-day activities enables everyone to be on the same page in terms of who takes ownership of this. Something that's often missing within just a general way of work is something as basic as an action tracker. So I'm sure some of us have left meetings knowing more or less who's doing what, but then a week later, no one knows. So having something as basic as an action tracker, just a living document that you use day to day, again, aligns everyone on who's doing what, and it allows you to update and keep track of what's happening. All right, so into the last section. So up until now, I've tried to convince you to think a bit more. So I'll go back. Think before we act, get clarity up front about what you're doing, why you're doing it. Then we enter into think ahead. So think about what can possibly go wrong. Think about what assumptions are we making that can maybe bite us towards the end. And then when we encounter problems, think about why it happens and then try and put stuff in place to prevent that from happening. And then we went on to think about ownership. Everything needs an owner. Now I'm going to try and tell you to not think too much. So there's a trap that catches even the most disciplined thinkers. Now you've done the work, you've thought it through, you've planned it, you've anticipated the risks, and then you start refining this product that you want to deliver. And then you work on it a little more, and then a little more, you're trying to perfect it before you launch, and then you work on it a little bit more. And so this category or this principle exists because thinking taken too far becomes its own form of inaction. So somewhere you just have to go. At some point you are going to have enough. And as part of the agile methodology in project management, there's this insight that working output is the primary measure of progress. So it's not about fancy documentation or slideshows. It's about something working in front of real people, generating real feedback. So what this looks like in practice is instead of waiting until something until something is finished before you share it, set yourself a time box, a fixed window, and then deliver whatever you have by the end of it, whether it's done or not, because it's enough to learn from, right? So getting feedback from actual people using it is much better than waiting and waiting. And this ties in nicely with another prominent principle in the world of project management, which is the 80-20 principle, or the so-called Pareto principle, which really says that 80% of the value comes from 20% of the effort. And so the takeaway here is really, am I working on that 20%? Am I working on the things that's going to move the needle the most? If you're not, whatever you do beyond that 20% is going to add less and less value, and your return on effort put in is going to be less and less. And so the last tool I want to show you is this Moscow prioritization. I'm sure those of you in the product space would know this very well. It's really categorizing everything that must happen in 4 categories. The M in the Moscow stands for must have, and then you have should have, could have, won't have. And that immediately puts all the activities or features in a order of priority. And then when you need to ship, you don't have to wait for the could have and won't have. You can do that before then. Okay. Now it's really just landing this all in a bit of a summary. So the key takeaway here, it's been a lot, and hopefully there's a bit of a discussion that follows so I can clarify some of the stuff. But the key takeaway here is before you start with an activity or initiative or project, just think about why are you doing this? Understand the bigger picture at play. And then when you have that foundation, think about what can go wrong and think about what happened. And when you encounter things that go wrong, think about why and fix it. Think about ownership and then know when to stop thinking and go. And yes, okay, a counter argument to everything I've said up until now is, yeah, but this is going to take a lot of time on top of whatever I'm already doing. And so I'm not going to make as if it's not going to take time. But I think by thinking about the right things at the right time and by applying these principles, you will undoubtedly free up time, well, mental bandwidth and physical time, and you will have fewer crises that pulls you sideways. Cool. That's the last slide, and then we'll see how the discussion goes. But more information on me you can find by scanning this QR code and about my company. But then, as I said, if you scan the QR code on the top, you will get, I can quickly show you, you will get a generic Notion template like the one I've shown you with explanations in it. And it gives you all the tools that we've discussed. And yeah, that's free for you to use and to copy and go on.
That's great. Thanks very much. Let me grab that link and then the links quickly, sorry, and then I can share them with everyone. And we can send those off. Thanks a lot. Right. I'll just leave this up for a bit so people can scan, and then we'll take it off. Are there any questions we have from people in the chat? We had Lisa was in very, very early. I think this was on one of your very first introductory slides, which was just a comment about breaking trust. But I'm not sure what the context is there. Lisa, if you have more context, maybe let us know. And then Josh says hi to Liesel, but she's just not here at the moment. So we'll get back to that one. Okay, Rudi, thank you so much. I have a couple of things that stood out to me, particularly when you were talking about measuring and outputs, and the kind of tension and how you manage. I'm sure you also know Goodhart's law around this. That when you measure something, it becomes a goal, and then people game the numbers and the outputs, and which is kind of in tension with the always measure. How do you kind of mitigate against that? Because often, and I speak from experience across many years of these kinds of projects, an output in software is measured and story points completed in a sprint. It's very. They are features shipped, bugs closed. Those types of things are what get measured, and it's quite easy to game those, right? You can inflate story points in your estimations. You can ship features that don't really solve any problems. There are all sorts of things. Velocity can be gained by avoiding the hard bits, and so on. So there's that tension between output and what gets measured, and then measuring, as you say, as a fundamental thing to keep projects going. Do you have any thoughts on what should you measure so that you avoid that trap of the measurement becoming the thing rather than the output? Yeah. Sorry, that was a big rambling thing, but it was in my head while you were talking. Yeah. So the measure shouldn't be the target, basically. Yeah. Yeah. The tension between the target and the output.
If I understand you correctly, I think, again, if your question is what should be measured, I think it goes back to what value is what you're busy supposed to deliver, and that becomes the carrot. So any measurement that speaks to that, whether it's key results or outcomes, must point towards that. To measure story points feels a bit superficial, and I know it's standard practice in many teams.
Yeah, all the time, yeah.
Yeah, I would stay away from measuring things like that and measure output and a working product instead of semantics like story points.
Right.
Can I chip in?
Go for it.
I've seen my fair share of stuff going wrong in software development, and I don't think we are anywhere close to solving that. But I used to take I don't think one should skip over the measurement, but the measurement was always for me. That's where you cannot look at the measurement and the data in isolation. So I always taught the people around me, it's our conversation starter. So as an example, if velocity is going down, the talking point around the velocity going down is that maybe there is a complexity that was added, or Yeah, I struggle to think of an example now, but it's always like use the data and the measurement as an opportunity to start a conversation and explain to the client why might velocity be down, even if it is a thing like the team is just burnt out and they're not working as fast. But yeah, so if you have to measure stuff, and I think measurement is forced. I don't know if you agree with me, Justin and Rudy, but sometimes it's forced from the client side, more so from the
often.
service side. And so they want to see that, but you can't just look at the data on its own. You have to use the data to discuss the reasoning behind the metric changes or the measurement changes. And then you said earlier you need to be able to motivate that. Like at any time in the project, you should be able to speak about these things.
Yeah, what I like about those measurements is that it's a window into something more, right? So when the velocity goes down or something happens, as you said, it's just important to have the conversation. Sometimes you would have a chat about it and then you move on. But to deep dive into what's going on there, I think is another key thing is understand the root cause of why it went down and then address that. And yeah, I think measurements are often driven by reporting, as you said. I mean, that's the game that's played and very few ways around it. But I think utilize what you have, and those are good conversation starters, as you said, Liesl. So, yeah.
I think also with the problem is it's not always the client aren't always able to see the work, right? It's at the end of the day, they look at what they can see. But there's so many things that happen that they can't see on a screen, that you can't show them. And so what do they have to fall back on? They have to take those measurements and they have to go and use it in a meeting to quantify whatever, and they just don't have the technical depth to understand what needed to happen in the background for whatever to appear on the screen. I mean, I've seen so many sprints where there's nothing to show at the end of the sprint. There literally is nothing to show. It was a research spike, and it's just so hard to show it if it doesn't convert on a screen.
I think that's why it's so important to get some working product into their hands as soon as possible, to as quickly as possible have them something to see and report back to their boards. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Yeah. People don't respond to a list of things we completed this sprint. They respond to something on a screen that they can use, that they can see value in immediately. Yeah. So you need to translate rather than report, I think. Like these are translated into these outcomes rather than here's an output of 140 sprint points or whatever, points this sprint. Yeah. Right. Liesl, Josh says hi.
Hi, Josh.
There's a comment from Aaron around knowledge index saves a lot of onboarding time. I presume that was referring to the Samsung example that you mentioned, Rudy.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult to get someone to own managing a knowledge hub, because that requires someone to, within projects, when lessons are learned, to take that and put it into a database or whatever. I mean, it's difficult to get someone to own that, but when you get it right, it's super powerful. And I think it's going to become more powerful with the technology at our hands these days.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Yeah. It's something we've at NML have tried to do over the years. But as you say, unless there's someone dedicated to taking ownership of that, it languishes. Yeah, it can languish easily. Yeah. So it does need to be. It needs to be a fundamental part of your way of working. Otherwise, we have grand designs starting off everything, and No, go ahead, Liesl.
I've got a comment. It's just something also that you said that resonated. Is especially if it's a longer term project, like something that goes 6 months and beyond. Documentation doesn't always stop at the coding documentation. It's the decision-making documentation. Because so many times I've seen where it's a long project and you almost come full circle where somebody goes, okay, they want that feature again, or they want this piece of work again, and you have actually done it, decided against it, removed it, but especially when there's churn on the people working on the project, you cannot remember what was the reasoning. And so documenting the reasoning for decisions at certain key points is also I've never seen it done really well. That's the thing. It's also like a discipline. You've got to have somebody that's disciplined in documenting these things so that you could reference it and go back to it. But so many times it gets lost in translation. There's no real good way to document it, but it's such a valuable thing to understand why a decision was made and documenting that decision. And maybe perhaps even the date that it was done and who were the people involved in making the decision. Just so you have this foot to stand on to say, this is what we decided at that point for these reasons, and these were the decision makers that made that decision.
I couldn't agree more. In this Notion page, just below actions, there's a decision tracker. And this is one of the first things we typically implement in a project is you need to keep track of decisions made. Maybe it's for your own protection, but just overall to align everyone. As you said, down the line, you're not going to remember what was said on day 2 of the project. So absolutely agree. That's pivotal, yeah.
I have so much to say about project management. It's really hard.
Oh yeah, I don't think we disagree.
There's so much to think about. I also typically, because I'm a operational thinker, what I liked is thinking ahead. So even though people don't want to take the time to sit down and think about what could go wrong, I don't want to say it's a nice to have. It's almost like something you have to think about as a team and document the things that could go wrong. Because this is also, it's a failure point for project management, is not anticipating what can go wrong. And then having to say that only at the point where it happens, which again, a lot of the stuff is so difficult, because then you sit in front of a client and you have to always say software development's like opening the hood of a car, and you're not always quite sure what you're going to find in there. And it's only until you do very, very deep diving that you sometimes find the fault or not, or just see the state that it's in. And so anticipating, I feel like that's also a very, very valuable thing to do at the start of a project, especially if it's a bigger project where many things go wrong.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people is in firefighting mode. And I would argue that the biggest thing you can do to get you out of firefighting mode is to have an active living risk register that you actively work on. That easily moves you into more of an anticipation role than firefighting the whole time.
And great if maybe you never come across those risks. Maybe it's just this ideal situation where it doesn't happen. But if you don't anticipate them, that's when you get in trouble.
Yeah, 100%. And I think back to the previous point of a knowledge hub being so useful, another thing mature project management companies do is they build a bit of a prompt list from lessons learned, from previous risks and assumptions. So every time you start a project, you have this prompt list to look at that triggers thoughts on what can be the risks for this project, or what assumptions do we make without knowing. And yes, big projects, but I would say even the smallest projects, like think about 5 things that can go wrong. And as you said, maybe you wing it, maybe it never happens, but at least you're prepared for when it does.
Yeah. I think there's another question there.
It's a comment. It's a very interesting and nice one from Tuli. I hope I got your name wrong. Sorry, Liesel,
Right.
this one's covering you. I mean, what did I say? Sorry, geez. It's been a long day. I hope I got your name right, Tuli. Apologies. I'm a professional nurse currently working for a training company in the mining industry. My husband is a civil engineering site project manager, nowhere near your field, but conceptually, I've learned plenty. That's a really great comment. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think also, project management is project management, right? It's not, and we can talk about velocity and sprint story points and whatever, but the principles remain the same around what Rudi's been talking about, definitely. Yeah.
Rudi, can I ask a question? How much does industry knowledge matter in project management? So as an example, let's just say, okay, I can only speak to software development because that's what I know. But say you're building for the courier guy, you're building some kind of logistics system to manage their fleet. Do you feel that a project manager having very explicit logistics experience is always the better choice, or should it be the choice? What is your take on it?
This is a very controversial point within the project management space. So obviously you have people that believe in project management specialists that stay within industries. I'm on the other side of the spectrum. So I think you should prioritize getting someone that's good in project management before worrying about their specific industry knowledge. The key, I think, is for a project manager to be able to facilitate discussions that's outside of their wheelhouse. Like know who to get in the room for what decisions to be made. What structures do we need in place to fast track decision making? A caveat to that is sometimes there's just not budget to have separate SMEs and project managers. In those cases, it would make sense to have a specialist in a field that manages the project. But I believe in a project manager playing an objective role, so not to get involved technically, because again, then that's going to become priority and project management will fall to the background. So I'm in the camp of believing project management skills cuts across, and ideally have someone that doesn't get involved technically, because then you lose ownership and those things, which I think is more important than another expert opinion.
I wanted to say that's the other side of the pendulum is a project manager then leading what it should be, which is not his role. His role is to, I always see it like your client is your subject matter experts, and the people doing the project work are the specialists in what needs building, whether it's building company or architects or whatever, or software development, and the project manager should. That's what I think as well. Should sit in the objective seat in the middle. Because a lot of the time I felt like one of the things a project manager needs to be able to do is to be the dumbest person in the room. Because there's always people who sit in, and I don't mean to be condescending, but it's also just from experience, people will have burning questions and they would just not ask the questions. And if a project manager knows or thinks he knows all the answers to the questions, he might not ask them. But if he's okay to be the not the dumbest person in the room, I say that by not being mean, is to ask those questions, because I've been in so many calls where everybody or people after the call say, thank you so much for asking the question. Like, I just didn't have the guts to ask the question, but they're so thankful that somebody did ask it, and surface the difficult things.
I fully agree. And maybe there's something selfish in that, but a project manager should understand the integrated picture of what's happening within a project. And for you to build that understanding, you're going to have to ask many questions. And that's where it makes sense to me, again, to not be an expert in the field, but to just know how to facilitate.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I don't think we have any other questions. Do you have anything else, Liesel?
As I said, I can speak this topic to death.
We're running out of time. Unfortunately, we'll have to do a part 2. Yeah.
No, I think it was a great talk, Rudi. I like
Thanks
the
very
way
much, Rudi.
that you've laid it out. The important part is the thinking part.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks
enjoyed
for
it.
having me.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Rudi. Just hang on, we just got another comment. We've got a few minutes. I often think project managers don't need to understand the work. They need the work to be done and facilitate the processes to get the work done. Would that be a reasonable summary? I think so. Yeah. Thanks for you, sir. Thank you for that. I have popped the link to the Notion template. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Rudi. So everyone can get that. You can also join our Discord if you haven't already. I will also pop the link into YouTube. And if you join our Discord, then you'll get links everywhere. So I urge you to do that. It's a friendly place. We have discussions. It's mostly me sharing React vulnerabilities, but no, I'm joking. It's a nice. Please. Okay. That link has not gone to LinkedIn. Okay. I can't share to LinkedIn from here. Sorry, I just want to let people know. Sorry. Okay, there we go. All right. Thanks so much, Rudi. We really appreciate your time. And thanks to everyone who's joined us. This talk will be available on our YouTube in forever until we disappear for whatever reason. We'll share out the links again tomorrow as soon as it's all uploaded and been encoded, and we'll share those again on LinkedIn, Meetup, not Meetup, LinkedIn, Discord, and we'll have a recap in our newsletter. I guess actually, Liesl, the easiest way to find us is on LinkedIn, right? Because everything is available there to get to the Discord and everything. Yeah.
Yes,
Look for us on LinkedIn. That's best. Right. Okay. Cool. Thanks again to Rudi. Thanks for everyone, and we'll see you at the next one.
Yes. Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Rudi.